It all began with a whisper, a single leak in the dark, one sentence hidden in a secret cable. Yet that sentence shook nations. Beloved family, I stand before you not to tell a rumor, but to open the pages of a story that cuts deep into the soil of Africa itself. A story of a young captain, Ibrahim Traoré, standing before the weight of an empire and saying the most dangerous word in politics, no. This is not just Ibrahim Traoré news. This is not just Burkina Faso news. This is a cry from the heart of a continent, echoing across deserts and cities, reaching the ears of the elders and the dreams of the youth. What happens when one soldier refuses to bow, when one nation decides its resources, its dignity, its future are not for sale? Stay with me, family, for we are about to walk through fire and thunder, and we will see how defiance can become destiny. And before we dive deep, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join this community of truth tellers, because these are the stories the world powers never wanted you to hear. It began with silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence before a storm. A classified cable slipped into the light, a hidden sentence buried deep in the archives of power. Yet one sentence was enough to rattle the pillars of a nation. 48 hours, 60%, oil and gold. And at the bottom of the ultimatum, the name of a man the whole world knew, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. Family, let us pause here. This was no negotiation, no table of equals, no handshake of respect. This was a demand, dressed as diplomacy, a threat cloaked in business language. America was not asking Burkina Faso to partner. It was ordering Burkina Faso to surrender. The message was hand-delivered, not by chance, but by design. A former U.S. military attaché arrived at dawn, flanked by private contractors, the kind of men who speak not with words, but with weapons. They laid the cable on Captain Ibrahim Traoré's desk. The words were crystal clear. Allow U.S. corporations to extract your oil. Allow them to control your gold exports. Hand over long-term control of your energy policy to an American economic board. Do this within 48 hours, or face sanctions, sabotage, and isolation. My brothers, my sisters, this was not a partnership. This was extortion. This was imperialism in a suit and tie. But hear me now. When that demand touched Traoré's hands, he did not tremble. He did not panic. He did not beg. He read the letter twice, laid it aside, and looked his commanders in the eye. Tell the Americans, he said, Burkina Faso is not for sale. Can you feel that moment? A young captain, barely 35 years of age, staring into the shadow of an empire and refusing to kneel. That was not politics. That was a prophecy. Yet beneath the deserts of Burkina Faso, there was more at stake than anyone realized. For months, a secret task force had been working quietly, scanning the land, probing the rocks, and reading the earth. What they found was enough to change the destiny of a nation. Vast, untouched oil reserves. Not speculation, not rumors. Proof. Russian engineers had run the scans. Iranian drones had mapped the fields. North Korean technicians had secured the data. Every step was hidden, every record classified. Until one day, the Earth itself betrayed the secret. The first drills broke ground, and satellites in the sky caught the signals. American satellites, French satellites, the ever-watching eyes above the Sahel. Within 48 hours, Washington knew something new was stirring beneath the dust of Burkina Faso, not just oil, but sovereignty, not just gold, but dignity. Do you see why that cable came? Do you see why the ultimatum landed like a thunderclap? It was not simply about resources, it was about stopping an idea before it could spread. Because if Burkina Faso could rise, who would be next? Mali, Niger, Chad, Congo. Family history teaches us when empires sense defiance, they do not whisper, they roar. Exxon called, Chevron called. DC power players sat in closed rooms and asked the same question. How do we kill this before it becomes another Libya? Only this time, African-owned. And so, they sent their message, not wrapped in friendship, not cloaked in respect, but written in arrogance and delivered in haste. 7 pages marked, Confidential Strategic Resource Acquisition Framework. Inside those pages was not strategy, but theft written in fine print. 60% of the oil, gone. Control of the gold routes, gone. Oversight of every new contract, surrendered to an American advisory board. In exchange, promises of security, promises of technology, promises of protection from regime change. Family, let us call it by its true name, a bribe laced with a threat. At the top of the page, in red ink, one chilling note, Traore has current hours. Hours, not days, not weeks. Hours. But listen carefully. The empire miscalculated. They thought fear would make him fold. They thought intimidation would bend his spine. Yet the man they chose was not a pawn. He was a soldier with fire in his chest and his nation at his back. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood tall, his voice is calm, his eyes steady. He was not writing a reply with ink, he was writing it with steel. But what would happen when his defiance left the shadows and stepped into the light of the whole world? Family, the answer, would shake nations and terrify empires. Family, the silence did not last long. By midday, the whispers had already turned into headlines. From Lagos to Kinshasa, from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, African media lit up with one name, Ibrahim Traoré. The ultimatum was no longer a secret in the war room. It was a public challenge, a battle of dignity broadcast across the continent. And the young captain chose not to answer with whispers, not with secret letters, but with a voice that thundered from the television screens of his nation. The cameras rolled. No golden stage, no polished backdrop, just a soldier in uniform, one hand on the Burkina Faso flag, the other gripping a folder stamped U.S. Threat. His eyes locked into the lens, steady as stone. His voice carried the weight of generations. To the people of Burkina Faso and to our African brothers and sisters, he began, an offer has been made to sell our oil, to sell our gold, to sell our honor in exchange for fear. He paused. Silence hung in the air like a storm about to break. To those behind this insult, to Mr. Trump and his backers, he declared, you have misjudged us. We are not Libya. We are not Iraq. We are not your playground. We will never trade our land for your luxury. We will never bow to your bullets or your banks. And then, the line that electrified the continent. You gave us 48 hours. Here is our reply. You now have 48 hours to take your greed, your threats, and your arrogance and leave African soil. Family, do you feel that fire? That was not just a speech. That was a line drawn in the sand. The streets erupted. In Ouagadougou, drums pounded, crowds danced, voices roared into the night. Across Africa, radios replayed his words, and in the markets, in the buses, in the homes of ordinary people, the refrain spread. He said no. He said no. He said no. But as Africa cheered, the empire trembled. In Washington, the message landed like a bomb. Oil boardrooms scrambled. At ExxonMobil, executives demanded answers. At Halliburton, strategy teams raced to draft scenarios. In Langley, CIA operatives watched their monitors with alarm. They had expected silence, or at best, a quiet compliance. Instead, they got defiance, loud, public, and contagious. So the counterattack began, not with tanks, not yet, but with narratives. CNN warned of economic isolation. The BBC spoke of instability. Experts on American networks shook their heads and said, "This young man is reckless, he is dangerous, he is leading his people into ruin." But family, the people of Burkina Faso were not watching with fear. They were watching with pride. Students in universities held teach-ins about sovereignty and resource justice. Women's groups cooked meals for soldiers guarding the mines. Young people plastered the internet with memes, remixing Western headlines into satire, and the message spread beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The empire had hoped to isolate Traore. Instead, they amplified him. He was no longer just a captain in a small West African nation. He was becoming a symbol, a voice, a banner of resistance. Family, understand this. Washington's fear was never just the oil. Their fear was the idea. If one soldier could stare down the United States and live to tell the story, what would stop Mali, Niger, Chad, or Congo from trying the same? That is why the pressure grew fiercer. Surveillance drones flew lower. Social media smear campaigns painted Traore as unstable, erratic, unfit to govern. Private contractors lurked at the borders. The empire whispered its favorite threat: regime change. But Traore was not folding. He was not retreating. He was not even flinching. He called his special sovereignty force, ordered the lockdown of oil fields, doubled security on gold convoys, and told his people, if they want 60% of our future, they will face 100% of our resistance. The stage was set. One side, armed with wealth, intelligence networks, and global media. The other side was armed with dignity, unity, and the determination of a people who had nothing left to lose but their chains. But family, the world was about to discover that Traore was not standing alone. When he lifted his voice, other voices rose beside him, and together they would shake the foundations of the empire. Family, when a man stands and says no to an empire, the ground shakes. But when a nation joins him, the earth begins to move. And in Burkina Faso, the earth was moving. The 48 hours came and went. The American ultimatum expired, not with surrender, but with defiance. Captain Ibrahim Traoré signed a decree that no one thought possible. All oil and gold reserves within Burkina Faso are hereby nationalized and permanently protected from foreign ownership. In one stroke of a pen, centuries of exploitation were challenged. French companies that had siphoned wealth for decades expelled. Canadian mining firms that controlled gold contracts revoked. US-backed surveyors who thought they were mapping their future escorted to the border. Family, let us call it what it was, a revolution on paper, but a revolution written in the blood of history. The streets erupted once more. Drums beat louder. Fireworks cracked in the night sky, and crowds shouted until their voices broke. He said no. He said no. He said no. It was not just a celebration. It was catharsis, the release of generations who had long been told they were too weak to resist. But as the people danced, the empire raged. In Washington, the silence was deafening. No official statements, no press conferences. Behind closed doors, however, alarm bells rang. Oil markets dipped. Investors panicked. boardrooms in New York whispered words they feared to say aloud: nationalization. And then the counterstrike intensified. CNN warned of humanitarian disaster. The BBC claimed Burkina Faso's economy is on the brink. Fox News declared, "This man must be stopped." Analysts paraded across screens, branding Traore as unstable, reckless, another Gaddafi in the making. Family, the smear campaigns did not stop with television. Social media swarmed with bots spreading lies. Scandals, fake corruption stories, doctored images. The empire threw every trick in the book at this young captain. But something remarkable happened. The people did not bow. They laughed. They reposted the smears with captions like, "If the West hates him this much, he must be doing something right." University students remixed CNN clips into protest songs. Youth wore T-shirts that read, "Not for sale." Traore was no longer just a president. He was becoming a meme, a movement, a mirror reflecting the pride of a continent. And the movement spread. In Mali, murals of Traore appeared overnight, painting him as a lion standing atop oil barrels. In Guinea, crowds marched in solidarity. In Chad, in Niger, in the Central African Republic, young voices rose, chanting the same refrain: "Our resources, our future, our fight." Washington's nightmare was unfolding before their eyes. What began as Burkina Faso news was now becoming a continental doctrine. And when Mali's Assimi Goïta, Niger's General Chiani, and Guinea's Mamadi Doumbouya landed in Ouagadougou to stand beside Traore, the message thundered louder than any speech. If you touch Burkina Faso, you touch us all. This was more than diplomacy. This was the birth of the AES Shield, Africa's answer to NATO. Soldiers crossed borders not as invaders, but as brothers. Mali sent advisors to guard oil fields. Niger provided logistics. Guinea opened its skies for supply routes. And while soldiers fortified the ground, activists fortified the airwaves. AES-backed media launched counterattacks online, exposing disinformation, revealing the truth behind the resource wars, flooding feeds with one message: Africa is not yours to buy. Meanwhile, in Western capitals, panic deepened. Former CIA operatives went on panels warning of a dangerous new axis. Oil executives demanded intervention. The State Department muttered about rogue regimes. And in the background, the whisper grew louder: regime change. But Traore's resolve only hardened. He told his people, "They want 60% of our wealth. Then they will face 100% of our resistance." Family, do you see what was happening? What began as an ultimatum had become a movement. What began as a demand for oil had become a doctrine of dignity. And the more the empire tried to crush it, the more it spread. But if Burkina Faso could defy the world's most powerful empire and live, what would happen if the whole of Africa stood together? Family, I want to hear from you. Do you believe this is the dawn of a united Africa? Or just the first battle in a longer war? Family, while the streets of Ouagadougou thundered with drums and joy, in Washington the silence was heavy, almost suffocating. The ultimatum had failed. The deadline had passed. And instead of submission, the world saw defiance broadcast live. Donald J. Trump broke the silence first. At 7:42 a.m. Eastern Time, he fired off a single all-caps tweet. "Traore just made the biggest mistake of his life. Africa will pay for this." Markets shook. Newsrooms exploded. Within minutes, American networks lined up panels of generals, analysts, oil executives, all repeating one word: dangerous. The CIA escalated operations in West Africa. Surveillance drones tightened their patrols. Private contractors slipped closer to the borders. The Pentagon quietly shifted naval assets toward the Gulf of Guinea. The whisper grew into a threat. If economics could not bend Traore, perhaps force would. But family, the empire, was not the only one watching. In Beijing, a low-profile delegation boarded a plane. No soldiers, no weapons, engineers, economists, diplomats. Within 72 hours of the ultimatum, China was offering more than promises. They brought blueprints for a refinery to be built in 90 days, gold valuation systems free from Western banks, and a digital trade platform powered by the yuan, bypassing the dollar and the CFA franc alike. In Moscow, another plane touched down. Out rolled electronic warfare equipment, anti-drone systems, and crates marked specialized defense. Russia was not whispering, Russia was signaling, your oil fields will not fall easily. The West called it a dangerous new axis. But on the streets of Africa, it looked like something different. A lifeline. To ordinary people, China and Russia were not overlords. They were tools, leverage, proof that Africa had other choices beyond Paris and Washington. And so the global lines hardened. The West painted Traore as a dictator, reckless and unfit. Time magazine painted him as a symbol, the man America can't bully. The stage was no longer just Burkina Faso versus the United States. It was empire versus emergence, old world versus new. And the question whispered from Johannesburg to Nairobi, from Harlem to Havana. Was this the birth of a new order or the beginning of a dangerous storm? Family, if the world was now divided, then the road ahead would not be peace, but trial. And the question became, would Africa walk that road together or stumble once more in the shadow of the empire? Family history is not written in a single day. It is carved through struggle, through fire, through choices made when the night is darkest. And in the wake of Traore's defiance, a new path stretched before Africa, not smooth, not easy, but alive with possibility. In Ouagadougou, the young captain gathered his council. His words were simple. They gave us 48 hours to bow. We gave them 48 hours to leave. Now we must prepare for the road ahead. The AES shield was born not in treaties, but in trust. Mali sent armored units across the border. Niger activated radar to protect shared skies. Guinea pledged emergency air routes for supply. One after another, nations stood declaring, if you touch one of us, you touch all of us. Family, can you see it? For the first time in generations, Africa was building not just borders, but bonds. Not chains, but shields. But let us not be naive. The empire was not finished. Satellites circled closer. Intelligence agents plotted disinformation. Western media framed the resistance as reckless, and whispers of intervention still drifted across the Atlantic. Yet the people refused to fear. In Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa, crowds gathered outside U.S. embassies chanting, "Africa is not for sale." In the streets of Johannesburg, placards read, "Keep your democracy, we will keep our dignity." And then came a video only 43 seconds long. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, steady and unshaken, looking straight into the lens. This is not about oil. This is not about gold. This is about the soul of Africa, and I would rather die standing than live kneeling. Family, that video raced like wildfire, reposted millions of times, quoted by presidents, sung by choirs, painted on walls. To some it was defiance, to others it was destiny. So the road ahead was clear. though filled with storms. Stand together or fall divided. Resist with unity or surrender to the empire. Choose sovereignty or accept subjugation. The question was no longer whether Traore would bow. He had already answered. The question was whether Africa would rise with him, or whether the empire would find a way to break the chain of solidarity. Family, the world was holding its breath, but Africa was breathing free for the first time in a long, long while. The story was not over. In truth, it was only the beginning. Family, when we look back on this story, we must see more than headlines. We must see history repeating itself and history breaking free. For centuries, Africa's wealth was carried away on ships, drained through contracts, stolen through banks. Our ancestors bled so that empires could feast. That is the anger, the righteous anger, that rises when we hear an ultimatum demanding 60% of a nation's lifeblood. But family, there is also sorrow. Sorrow for the generations who never saw their gold, never touched their oil, never tasted the fruit of their own land. Sorrow for the leaders who were silenced, the nations broken, the dreams deferred. That is the regret heavy on our hearts. Yet, beyond anger and sorrow, there is something greater. Hope. Hope in the fire of a young captain who stood tall. Hope in the unity of nations declaring, if you touch one, you touch all. Hope in the chants of youth, in the laughter that turned propaganda into protest songs, in the courage of women feeding soldiers at the mines. This is not only Ibrahim Traoré news, not only Burkina Faso news. This is the sound of a continent stirring, of a people rediscovering their dignity. But family, let me ask you, do you believe this is the dawn of a new African era, or just another battle in the long war for freedom? Do you believe one soldier's defiance can spark a continental awakening? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who still doubts that resistance is possible. And most of all, don't just watch. Be part of this family. Hit that subscribe button, join this circle of truth, and let us keep shining light on the stories they try so hard to bury. Because in the end, the story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just his story. It is an African story. It is our story. And it is a reminder, whispered through the deserts and shouted from the streets. We will not bow. We will not sell. We will not be silent. Family, the empire has written its ultimatum, but Africa is writing about its future.